Hey guys, tonight we wake up tangled in grapevines. Your mouth tastes like crushed dates, sandal leather, and a faint trace of regret. Somewhere overhead, the sun slouches behind a fig tree pretending it wasn't watching what you did last night. You blink at the sky, but it blinks back with a headache. A soft breeze rustles the leaves, and it's unclear whether the world is gently laughing or judging you. You're Dionysus, kind of, at least for tonight. And you probably won't survive this myth unless you're the kind of person who drinks your water with lemon and a pinch of crushed thyme just to feel in control of something. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I'll raise a wine cup to your insomnia. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You groan and roll over in the vineyard. There's a goat asleep beside you. You both pretend this isn't the first time. The vines are too cheerful. Their little corkscrew tendrils reaching for your wrists like they've got gossip to spill. You stagger to your feet, sandals full of dust, tunic full of leaves, and memories full of holes. The last thing you recall is a flute, a fire, and someone shouting, "I dare you to bless this." Fringe, mythological tidbit. Dionysus wasn't just the god of wine, he was the god of madness, revelry, and loosening, whatever that meant. One version of the myth says he was born twice, which frankly explains the commitment issues and the overachieving. Mainstream fact. Dionysus was deeply associated with vineyards and fermentation, but more importantly, he was the only Olympian whose parents weren't both gods. His mother Semele was a mortal who asked to see Zeus in his true form. She didn't make it. Dionysus was sewn into Zeus's thigh and later reborn, which is a lot. Anyway, your temples throb. The earth tilts, but not like a majestic celestial axis, more like a drunken cartwheel. You shuffle toward a clearing where the olives hang low and judgmental. You pluck one chew slowly and try to remember whether you're on an island, a mountaintop, or just really deep in a metaphor. A satyr appears. He's got a crooked grin and a mug made of bark. Again, he asks, offering it. You accept it like a confession. The wine hits your throat like a friendly slap. Historians still argue whether Dionysian rituals were genuine spiritual exercises or just formalized excuses for wild parties. One ancient commentator claimed the god was worshipped best through the forgetting of self, which basically means black out responsibly. You wander into a patch of soft earth and collapse backward. Your arms spread, your hair catches in the roots, and you look up at the sky and say, "Okay, that was fun." The sky doesn't answer, probably hungover too. Around you, the vineyard hums with the sound of tiny ancient bees, the kind that existed before guilt, before calendars, before moderation. You whisper never again, which is the ancient Greek way of saying, "See you next week." You close your eyes. Somewhere in the distance, you hear someone shout, "We should build a stage for this." You blink, still on your back, still tangled in the earth, but now someone's playing a flute. Not well. It's the kind of flute playing that suggests the instrument was once a fish, and it's trying to return to the sea. A chorus of giggles erupts somewhere nearby. You lift your head, see a circle of women wearing ivy crowns and nothing else dancing like they've got bees in their sandals and secrets in their laughter. You sit up, rub your temples, and realize, oh, this is a Thursday. That explains it. You stagger toward a fig tree, hoping it'll shelter you from both the sun and your own decisions. There's a pomegranate stuck in a low branch. You pluck it mostly to feel in control again. You crack it open. It bleeds red. Very on-brand, mainstream historical fact. Dionysian rituals or bacchanalia were real festivals in ancient Greece and Rome. Sometimes state-sanctioned, sometimes forbidden. They involved ecstatic dance masks, music, and the consumption of wine, not so much as a beverage, but as a portal. Quirky fringe detail. Some cults devoted to Dionysus believed he could be summoned by shaking ivy branches while screaming poetry. Honestly, this is only marginally stranger than most frat parties. You walk barefoot now. Your sandals were last seen dangling from a tree branch next to a very confused owl. Ahead, a stone amphitheater rises from the slope of the hill. It looks both ancient and like it was built 10 minutes ago by very determined goats. You descend the steps of the unfinished stage. The stones are warm under your feet. A breeze carries the faint scent of burnt time and whatever regret smells like when it's been aged in oak barrels. On the center stone, someone has carved a face. Not sculpted carved. It's crude, grinning, lopsided, and oddly familiar. A mask. You pick it up. The moment your fingers touch it, the world tilts again, but this time not because you're dizzy. No. This time, it's myth. The trees stretch taller. The sky deepens to a richer blue. The air thickens with the smell of incense and crushed bay leaves. And you are not just Dionysus now. You are performance. You are spectacle. You are the god who wakes up late and demands a spotlight. Historians still argue whether the theater of Dionysus in Athens was built explicitly for religious performance or if it was simply a very elaborate excuse to day drink while judging playwrights. Either way, you approve. You raise the mask to your face. You don't put it on. You just hold it. Sometimes that's enough. In the hush of the grove, you begin to speak not in your voice, but in the one you save for dramatic exits and passionate monologues. It booms even when whispered. And wouldn't you know it? The satyrs gather again. So do the dancers. A few mortals arrive confused but too polite to leave. Someone brings snacks. This is how theater begins. Not with scripts or stagehands, but with a hangover, a need to explain it, and a god who can't help being a little extra. You lower the mask. The amphitheater echoes your silence like it's proud. One of the dancers approaches you with a platter of olives and honey cakes. She bows, then says, "Do you want to rehearse or improvise?" You look out at the empty rows of stone seats. You say, "Let's improvise." The trees sway like a curtain call. You're not sure what's more disorienting, the smell of fermented figs in the air or the realization that your impromptu improv session now has a script. Not a real script, mind you. Just some wrinkled sheepskin tossed at your feet by a passing crow, inked in wine stains and probably cursed, but legible in the way dreams sometimes are. You squint at it. Scene 1. A god wakes up too late for his own parade. Relatable. You rise from the stage's center stone like a dramatic souffle. Somewhere to your left, a goat coughs. A nearby satyr shushes it like this is opening night. You take a deep breath, raise the mask once more, but this time you put it on. And instantly the world changes shape. The amphitheater expands, stretching wider than it should. Seats ripple upward into the sky. Every rustling leaf becomes a drum roll. Every chirp of a cricket morphs into a line of dialogue. You speak, and the echo isn't just sound, it's prophecy. Mainstream historical fact. The theater of Dionysus, nestled into the southern slope of the Acropolis in Athens, was the first stone theater ever built. It could seat up to 17,000 people, all there to watch tragedies, comedies, and the ancient equivalent of reality TV with masks and sandals. Fringe detail alert. Some actors reportedly wore platform boots, cothurni, to appear taller, and their voices were amplified not by microphones, but by the clever shape of their oversized masks and the theater's acoustics. Imagine yelling into a funnel while standing inside a conch shell. Back to you. You step forward, mask firmly on, and the script practically leaps into your throat. Behold, you shout the god of wine, reborn from grape and grief. Silence. Then applause. You're not sure who's clapping, but you suspect at least one pine tree has sprouted hands. You glance down at the next scene. Scene 2. The city denies him. Classic. You take another step forward and the scenery shifts again. The amphitheater dissolves into a stone courtyard where mortals in togas side-eye you like you're selling essential oils with a side of thunder. A senator sneezes. You bless him unprompted. He faints. The city Athens probably, or maybe some dreamier version of it, looks hesitant. They've seen gods before. Most don't stick around. They tend to throw lightning or seduce livestock. You're here offering wine and drama. Mixed reception. Historians still argue whether the cult of Dionysus was a grassroots movement or an elite spiritual experiment. Some say his early followers were rural outcasts and women seeking spiritual release. Others say aristocrats latched onto the drama as a fashionable way to scream into the void while drunk. Probably both. You twirl. The cloak you definitely weren't wearing a moment ago flares like a storm cloud dipped in velvet. Someone whispers, "Is that a monologue?" You grin beneath the mask. Oh, sweet summer skeptic. You begin. I bring you chaos wrapped in laughter. I bring you wine older than your regrets. I bring you stories soaked in blood or honey, depending on your budget. A child claps. You wink at them through the mask's eye holes. Then you bow so deeply your forehead nearly kisses the marble. Thunder rumbles. Of course it does. Suddenly the theater is back. The stone seats fill with faceless shapes applauding politely, or ominously. It's hard to tell. Theater audiences are tricky like that. You sit down at the edge of the stage. A cluster of vines curls gently around your ankle like a curtain pulling itself shut. You whisper intermission. The air holds its breath. You lean back into the vines like they're a particularly clingy chaise lounge, letting them cradle your weight as the dream amphitheater softens into something more intimate. The mask's edges itch at your temples, but you don't take it off, not yet. You've earned this role. You're no longer just a guest here. You're the patron saint of whispered punchlines and mythic overreactions. The stage blurs, warps, and reforms into a banquet, no, a symposium as the Greeks would call it. Low tables groan beneath the weight of figs. Pomegranates, honeyed cakes, and wine served in wide bowls that look suspiciously like bird baths. Everyone's reclining, even the dog. And there in the center, wrapped in a leopard skin and wearing sunglasses made of shadow, somehow is Dionysus himself. He doesn't speak. He doesn't have to. His smirk alone invents an entirely new genre of sarcasm. You sit beside him, or maybe across. Time's slippery in this place. He raises his bowl, and without words, you know what's coming. The games. Mainstream, historical fact. Greek symposia weren't just drinking parties. They were social and intellectual gatherings where elite men discussed politics, philosophy, and poetry while sipping wine and playing competitive drinking games like katabos, where you'd fling dregs at a target across the room. The ancient frat house, basically minus TikTok, plus Plato. Quirky tidbit. Dionysus was often depicted in art with exotic animals, panthers, tigers, serpents, because his cult embraced chaos, transformation, and boundary breaking. Some myths claim his entourage once included a literal donkey who could freestyle poetry. No one's entirely sure if that was metaphor or just an exceptionally drunk donkey. You're handed a bowl. It pulses faintly in your hands, not ominous at all. The first game begins a contest of stories. Someone down the table begins an elaborate tale involving a stolen sandal, a crab that speaks only in riddles, and an accidentally enchanted sheep. Laughter ripples through the room. Your turn. You clear your throat and invent a tale about a mortal playwright who stole a god's stage, performed poorly, and was turned into a chorus line of frogs as punishment. Dionysus raises an eyebrow. Someone snorts wine through their nose. The bowl is refilled. Next game questions with no answers. Would you rather wrestle a minotaur or babysit Zeus's illegitimate children for a week? Who would win in a foot race, Hermes in flip-flops? Or Athena after 3 espressos? Is a satyr still a satyr? If he's vegan? The air is thick with incense smoke and absurdity. Dionysus finally speaks, his voice like thunder wearing silk. Why do mortals build theaters if not to practice being gods? The table falls silent. You reply without thinking. Because we're bad at being ourselves. The vines on the wall pause their swaying. The god nods. Historians still argue whether Dionysian worship was about escapism or transformation. Was it simply an excuse to party or a sacred method of touching the divine through performance and intoxication? Some think it offered controlled madness, a place to dissolve the ego just long enough to become something bigger. You set your bowl down. It vanishes. So do the tables. So does the symposium. All that remains is Dionysus standing alone at the center of a new stage. He removes his shadowy sunglasses. There are stars where his eyes should be. Time for Act 2, he says. A single spotlight blooms over your head. You blink into the light, and when your eyes adjust, you're back in the stone-carved theater, but this time, the seats are full. Really full. Not just people either. There's a cyclops eating olives straight from the jar. A chorus of nymphs in matching gold sandals. A sphinx scribbling in a tiny notebook. Even a disgruntled harpy trying not to shed feathers on her neighbor's toga. You're surrounded by every mythical being who's ever wanted box seats to chaos. And you're center stage. No pressure. The stone beneath your feet is warm and the air hums like it's waiting for something, like it already knows your lines before you do. Behind you, a curtain. In front of you, the god of theater with a grin that says improv or perish. You speak. You don't remember the first words, but they come out smooth, like olive oil over warm bread. You tell a story of the first theater, a sacred space carved into a hillside to honor Dionysus. How the Greeks once believed theater was more than entertainment. It was a ritual, a kind of controlled possession where actors channeled gods, kings, and fools alike. Mainstream historical fact. The Theater of Dionysus in Athens was one of the world's earliest purpose-built performance venues. Dating to the 5th century BCE, it could seat up to 17,000 people and hosted the legendary tragedies of Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus. These plays were performed during religious festivals, especially the city Dionysia, where entire city blocks shut down for days to honor the wine god with 3-act dramas and judging panels that made modern critics look gentle. Quirky tidbit. Ancient actors wore masks not just to play different characters, but because they believed it helped the gods see through them. Some masks even had small amplifying mouthpieces, basically the first theatrical megaphones. Dionysus didn't just inspire theater, he amplified it. Your story shifts. Now you're recounting the time Dionysus got so bored of Olympus politics that he invented tragedy as a coping mechanism. Therapy. You tell the audience wasn't invented by Freud. It was invented by a hungover god with too many feelings. A satyr in the second row nods solemnly. Your voice drops. You describe how the theater became a mirror for the city, how plays were used to debate war, justice, grief, even democracy. Some performances ended in silence, others in riots. A few ended in philosophical epiphanies that probably lasted right until someone spilled wine on their sandals. Historians still argue whether Athenian theater truly shaped public opinion or merely reflected it. Was it political propaganda in poetic form, or did it actually sway the polis? Some say the plays were therapy for the masses. Others believe they were just ancient TED Talks with better costumes. You glance off stage. Dionysus gives a small nod and suddenly the set changes. The curtain behind you falls upward, yes, upward, revealing a different scene. It's not Greece anymore. It's a hangover hut. Stone walls, curtains of grapevines, a hammock made of old togas, bottles strewn like sacred relics. A groggy voice mutters, "Too much ambrosia, never again." The god himself staggers into view clutching a lemon and what looks like an ostrich feather. Welcome to Dionysus's recovery lair. You narrate it all. His dramatic sighs, the way he demands absolute silence except for harp music, and his unshakable belief that the best cure for divine burnout is a new art form. Thus, the comedy is born. Laughter he proclaims from his wine bottle throne is just tragedy after a nap. The audience laughs. You throw in a quick aside. And that, kids, is how we got sitcoms. The god waves a hand and the hangover hut fades into stars. You're left standing alone on the stage, your voice echoing in every corner. You finish the tale with a bow. Not for applause, just to acknowledge the absurdity of it all. The curtain falls sideways. The audience vanishes. All that's left is the echo of your own heartbeat and the faint smell of fermented figs. The theater breathes. You exhale. The theater melts around you like warm wax, and your bare feet touch sand. Not just any sand, this stuff sparkles. Every grain is a memory, a leftover line, a missed cue. Welcome to Dionysus's backstage archive, where the god keeps every failed monologue and overacted death scene filed away for eternity. You step lightly, one wrong crunch, and you'll be reliving a bad chorus audition from 4 to 31 BCE. Somewhere a goat bleats dramatically. You look up and there it is, the original goat song stage, a wobbly wooden platform in the middle of a torchlit grove. Before the marble coliseums, before the structured trilogies and state-funded drama festivals, there was just a few people, a wild-eyed priest, and one goat that definitely wasn't clapping on beat. Mainstream historical fact. The word tragedy comes from the Greek tragoidia, meaning goat song. Historians still argue whether this was because goats were sacrificed before the performance given as prizes, or simply because actors wore goat-skin costumes. The ancient Greeks had a knack for turning farm animals into festival centerpieces. You'd think the goats would have unionized. You crouch beside the stage. The wood smells like old incense and panic. A carved inscription reads, "Speak the truth even if it's weird." Quirky tidbit. Ancient playwrights often wrote their characters to argue both sides of a moral issue but never offer clear answers. In one famous play, the chorus spent over half the performance debating whether it's worse to break a divine law or betray your family. The audience left unsure, just as Dionysus intended. As you sit down on the edge of the platform, you notice Dionysus is already beside you. He's reclining, of course. This time, he's sipping something green out of a horn made from what might be a unicorn's shin bone. His sandals are mismatched. His smile is not. You know, he says lazily, humans always forget this part. The before times. The sweaty beginnings. You nod. He continues. They build marble temples to drama, but it started here. With bad lighting, wooden masks, and too much wine. And you know what? What? He leans in close. It was better. Then he throws a grape into your mouth like you're a statue at a banquet. You choke politely. Suddenly, you're surrounded by ghostly echoes, snippets of old lines, forgotten stage directions, jokes that once killed. You catch fragments. And so I stabbed him with a spoon. Do not touch the sacred lyre with your feet. Why is the donkey wearing a laurel crown? Each echo leaves a shimmer in the air like fireflies made of dialogue. The grove glows. You whisper, "What is this place?" Dionysus looks smug. This is the after-party of every play that never made it. You laugh. Then burp. Then remember you never drank anything. The god winks. You wander deeper through the grove. The trees start to shift, no longer olive or pine, but scenes. You pass a tree with branches shaped like open curtains. Another drips fruit in the shape of comedy masks. One tree's bark just whispers, line over and over like a nervous understudy. You pause beneath a particularly naughty tree that hums in iambic pentameter. Here the world slows. You sit again, this time alone, and feel the heartbeat of 1,000 forgotten performances thump gently under the soil. You realize drama isn't made in the performance, it's made in the anticipation. The hush before the lights rise. The inhale before the first line. The silence before someone dares to be a fool. Historians still argue whether the Greeks intended these early plays as civic education, spiritual ritual, or pure entertainment. The answer, like most Greek things, is probably yes. You close your eyes. A voice your own rises from somewhere inside, telling a story about a god who built a temple not for worship, but for catharsis. A god who got so overwhelmed by divine responsibility that he invented theater to laugh and cry at himself, to watch his own mistakes rewritten until they made sense. You smile, because maybe that's what you've been doing too. The sand shifts, the grove dims, the goat finally claps offbeat, of course. And Dionysus says softly, "Encore." You nod. You wake up, or at least it feels like waking up. But instead of a bed or a theater seat, you're floating face up in a shallow pool surrounded by pillars. The water is warm and tastes faintly of thyme and theater sweat. On the walls, frescoes ripple and shimmer, depicting plays you haven't seen yet. You turn your head and see a woman reciting lines to a candle. Another figure rehearses a monologue to a fig tree. A goat wearing a tragic mask watches with alarming intensity. Welcome to rehearsal hour in Dionysus's temple. Don't worry, you're not expected to memorize anything. Just listen. A bell chimes deep and slow. It vibrates your teeth. Time apparently to learn the sacred mechanics of comedy because before you can understand tragedy, you have to survive a punchline in a toga. Mainstream historical fact. The origins of Greek comedy go back just as far as tragedy. In fact, many plays labeled comedy were deeply satirical takes on current politics, cultural trends, and of course, the gods themselves. Dionysus was often the butt of the joke, which might explain why he demanded a theater in his name. Historians still argue whether these plays were meant to entertain the masses or offer sly critique disguised in slapstick. A fig hits you in the forehead. You look up. A chorus member cloaked in vines waves apologetically. Sorry, she whispers, new scene, projectile fruit gag. You nod like that makes sense. Quirky tidbit. The earliest comic actors were often pelted with olives and figs by the audience if their jokes flopped. This encouraged them to improvise quickly. Some believe stand-up comedy was born from sheer survival instinct. You step onto the stage. Don't worry, this version of you knows the lines. You raise a crooked staff and launch into a monologue about how socks should be worshipped as minor deities. The crowd mostly squirrels, and at least one sleeping satyr laughs. A tomato sails past your head. Progress. The pool evaporates as you speak each line, drying a patch of stone until you're standing on the smooth floor of the Theater of Dionysus in Athens, real ancient echoing. The seats are empty, but full of ghosts. Not spooky ghosts, just judgmental ones. They cross their arms and whisper, "Too much nose acting." You bow. Dionysus appears again now, dressed in a costume stitched from scrolls and wine labels. He claps exactly once sarcastically, then nods. See, he says, not all divine invention has to be tragic. Sometimes you just need a really loud fart joke to remind people that gods aren't immune to gas. He turns on his heel and walks straight into a pillar which opens like a curtain. You follow. Inside is darkness. Not the scary kind. The quiet velvet kind. A rehearsal space in the mind. You hear whispers of future scripts, fragments of forgotten jokes. Someone muttering, "Let's cut that line about the goat's mother." You sit cross-legged. The ground pulses with ancient laughter. Historians still argue whether Dionysian comedy ever truly ended, or if it simply evolved into modern satire sketch shows and very committed community theater productions. But the structure, the tension and release, the call and response, it all started here. With masks, with olives, with absurdity taken seriously. A spotlight appears, but it's soft, like moonlight filtered through wine. You're not expected to perform this time. Just listen. The theater breathes. You exhale. And Dionysus's voice returns floating from everywhere and nowhere. Laughter is the first medicine. Wine is the second, and sleep well. That's the encore. You drift down the velvet tunnel and now you're gliding, not walking on a marble causeway lit by flickering torches shaped like upside-down wine goblets. You pass through curtains that hiss as they part, trailing fermented air and the scent of crushed myrtle leaves. Welcome to the back room of divine administration where Dionysus's priests debate the logistics of emotional chaos. This is where theater becomes civic duty. You're led into a round chamber lined with scrolls so tall they sway like trees in a breeze you can't feel. One priest, barefoot and blinking, hands you a clipboard. Audience mood calibration schedule, he says. Just sign here if you're emotionally available. You nod solemnly and scrawl your name with a quill shaped like a lyre string. Mainstream historical fact. In Athens, theater wasn't just entertainment, it was a state-funded civic event. The government paid for the dramatic festivals, subsidized tickets for poorer citizens, and considered theater a moral and educational tool. Whole city blocks would shut down during the Great Dionysia, and citizens would pack into the open-air theater of Dionysus for hours of philosophical roast battles in iambic pentameter. Fringe tidbit. Some believe seating in ancient theaters was deliberately arranged by temperament stoics in the back, criers in the front. Hecklers isolated near the exit with jars of wine and quieting figs. Historians still argue whether these state-sponsored plays genuinely influenced public policy or just gave citizens a rare state-approved opportunity to make fun of their leaders without being exiled. Back in the chamber, a stage manager with eyes painted on her eyelids pulls back a tapestry. "You're up," she says. "Time to oversee the mood waves." You step through and find yourself behind the audience looking down at the stone arena. Rows of Athenians draped in chitons lean forward as actors below wrestle with questions of fate and justice, and really bad puns about goat cheese. You sit at the mood console. Yes, there's a console. It looks like a xylophone made of crystal and grape stems. You plink a note, and someone in the fifth row sobs. You raise an eyebrow. "Huh," you say. "I'm good at this." The priest beside you shrugs. "You're channeling pathos. Just don't overdo it, or they'll start flinging sandals again." And so you play emotions like a harp, grief with a minor chord, joy with a melodic burp. The chorus below belts a song about loneliness and pottery taxes. A man in the third row passes out from emotional resonance. A woman near the front writes a sonnet in her lap without looking at the paper. You start to understand something. This isn't chaos. This is choreography. Even the madness has beats. Even the improv has rules. And behind the god of drunken revelry was a system of rehearsal ritual and repetition, so finely tuned it could move entire populations to cry, reflect, and riot, ideally in that order. The console lights dim. Your shift is over. You stand and stretch, bones cracking like ancient amphorae. Below, a new actor stumbles onto the stage masked as Dionysus himself. The real Dionysus, who's now lounging beside you with grapes in his hair, snorts. "I never did wear it that high," he says, pointing at the mask's slightly askew crown. You chuckle only mildly, startled that he's once again appeared out of nowhere. "Does it ever stop, you ass?" He gestures to the audience. They never stop needing a mirror. A moment of silence. Then he leans in. "Also, I installed wine beneath every fourth seat. It's a budget thing." You both laugh. From this height, the city of Athens stretches beyond the theater walls, humming with tension, inspiration, and the dull ache of too much public feeling. Dionysus stands and offers you a goblet. "For intermission," he says. You sip. It tastes like applause. You wander away from the theater, still tasting the afterglow of fermented applause on your tongue. The path now twists upward through olive groves where every tree seems to lean inward as if gossiping about last night's play. Cicadas drone like ambient mood music, and you spot a stone bench shaped like an amphora where, presumably, ancient critics once sat to complain about the third act. Dionysus trails behind you barefoot, and whistling a tune you can't quite place, probably because it hasn't been invented yet. Tonight you're heading toward the workshops. Because where there's divine art, there are human hands. Down a crooked hill of terracotta rooftops, you enter the Stoa of Masks. Here, in a dim hall filled with papyrus receipts and chalk-smudged drama coaches, artisans carve identities out of wood and wax. This is where Dionysian theater begins, not with performance, but with personas. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greek actors wore masks to amplify their expressions and voices in open-air theaters. Each mask was carefully constructed to reflect exaggerated emotions, joy, sorrow, rage, and help the audience instantly recognize characters and mood shifts even from the furthest seats. Fringe tidbit. Some masks were allegedly scented with herbs or oils so actors could smell their roles. Lavender for lovers, vinegar for villains. A few scripts even had scent cues noted in the margins, an early attempt at smell-o-vision. Historians still argue whether the mask makers themselves were considered artists or merely craftsmen. Some records hint at revered workshops with spiritual apprenticeships, while others suggest they were just overworked sculptors dodging amphora taxes. In the corner, you spot a master carver delicately chipping at a cedar block. He doesn't look up as you approach. Tragedy or comedy, he asks without prompting. You shrug. Bit of both. He nods and pulls out a third mask blank with two eye holes and a crooked mouth that could swing sad or smile depending on the lighting. Ah, he whispers. Audience surrogate. The most dangerous role. You take it holding the mask up to your face. The room shifts. Everything slows. You can still see, but now you feel the audience beyond the wall. Hushed giggles. Squirming anticipation. Someone hiccuping in row 4. It's like becoming the tuning fork of collective emotion. And it's not entirely pleasant. You rip the mask off and stumble back gasping. The carver raises an eyebrow. Not everyone can wear ambiguity. It's like trying to act with a hangover and no script. From the shelf behind him, he offers another, this one with deep frown lines and golden eyebrows. Try catharsis, he says. You shake your head. You're starting to understand why Dionysus built an entire infrastructure to manage this thing called theater. It's not just entertainment, it's plumbing for the soul. Drain the sadness, let the laughter bubble, then send everyone home before they start rioting about existential dread. Outside, Dionysus is now juggling figs while a goat bleats along. You ask, do you ever act in your own plays? He scoffs. Once. I forgot my lines, and the actor playing Zeus smacked me with a sandal. Never again. You both walk on. You pass a rehearsal garden where actors practice sobbing into ceramic urns, method crying apparently, and a group of children reciting limericks about Medusa's hairstyling woes. There's something comforting in this chaos. Because beneath the layers of myth, melodrama, and sadder jokes, there's a truth older than temples. Humans need stories to metabolize reality. And Dionysus, in his wine-stained wisdom, figured out the perfect delivery system, one where even sorrow feels poetic and hangovers have applause breaks. As twilight deepens, you glance back at the theater perched on the slope of the Acropolis. Its shadows stretch long and theatrical across the city, wrapping around columns like velvet drapes. I still think you built it to cure hangovers, you mutter. Dionysus smirks. Well, he says it's either that or yell into a cave. You press onward, sandals softly slapping the flagstones, as Dionysus hums behind you off-key, but charmingly so. You're headed downhill again now toward the back streets where the real critics live, the wine shops. Yes, the taverns, the drunk poets, the basement philosophers, the women who gossip like oracles with wine-stained lips and one eye permanently squinting. These are the places where Dionysian theater doesn't end. It spills over. Here in Athens, no play is really over until it's been argued about at a wooden table over olives, figs, and something unidentifiable pickled in brine. You duck through a fabric awning into a smoke-thick room buzzing with debate. At one table, a group of teens reenacts the tragic climax of last night's play using spoons and a grape cluster. At another, an older woman insists the chorus was clearly a metaphor for the Athenian navy, and no, she will not be taking questions. Mainstream historical fact. Theater in classical Athens was not mere pastime. It was a civic event. Attendance was often subsidized by the state, and the plays themselves, especially the tragedies, served as public reflections on law war leadership and mortality. Everyone from slaves to senators was expected to attend and think. Fringe tidbit. Some theater-goers brought their own birds, parrots, or trained ravens to mimic applause or heckle performers mid-play. Boo squawked from the wings might not have always been a human insult. Historians still argue whether these tavern debates actually influenced the next day's performances. Some believe playwrights rewrote lines overnight based on crowd reaction. Others say the scripts were sacred and unchangeable, locked like scrolls of fate, no matter how many fig juice-fueled critiques spilled through the city. You slump onto a low bench while Dionysus flirts with the tavern keeper's niece by turning her wine into pomegranate juice, then back again. Your brain is still reeling from the idea of state-sponsored group therapy disguised as drama. A nearby drunk nudges you and slurs, "The gods are actors too. Don't let them tell you different." You nod slowly, because maybe that's it. Maybe the divine isn't found in temples or thunderbolts, but in the act of pretending, in masks and mistaken identities, and that brief shimmer when an actor becomes something bigger than themselves. "Want to see my impression of Hades on open mic night?" the drunk adds. You politely decline. Instead, you glance at a mural above the bar, an amateur fresco of Dionysus leaning against a column, raising a cup with one hand and tossing grapes to a lion with the other. Beneath him in chipped paint is a tiny stage with faceless figures gesturing upward. You stare at it a long time. Because the idea is starting to settle in your ribs, theater was never meant to be high art perched on marble. It was and always has been an exhale, a collective sigh of, "We made it another day now. Let's laugh, cry, and shout about it under moonlight." Dionysus returns, sliding you a small clay cup of something sweet and spicy. "Try it," he says. "It's called tragic relief. Pairs well with odes and awkward love triangles." You sip. It burns slightly, then warms like a compliment you didn't expect. "Where to next, you ask?" He grins. "We've got a midnight rehearsal to crash." You raise your cup in mock salute as the tavern blurs behind you and the smell of roasted thyme drifts through the door. The wine, or whatever it is, leaves a tang of pine needles and mischief on your tongue. Outside, the streets are glowing with torchlight and echo faintly with tambourines. Somewhere in the distance, someone shouts a line from Euripides and gets booed by a chorus of geese. Perfect. The road back to the theater curls around a fig orchard, moonlit just enough to see your shadow stumble occasionally. Dionysus walks beside you, arms out like he's balancing on a tightrope, though there is no rope, and technically he's hovering a few inches off the ground. Just being dramatic. "You ever crash a rehearsal?" he asks. "That's where the real mess lives." You raise an eyebrow. He grins. You find the stage not quite empty, just occupied by people who don't know they're being watched. Young actors mumble lines, trip over sandals, laugh too loudly when they forget cues. An older director groans into her palms from stage left while chewing a sprig of fennel like it's revenge. Mainstream historical fact. Athenian actors had just a few weeks to rehearse entire plays before the grand Dionysia festival. Roles were limited. One actor could play several characters, sometimes flipping masks mid-scene. Choral training was intense, with synchronized singing and dancing viewed as sacred offerings. Fringe tidbit. There's an old theory that stagehands called meek and operators sometimes snuck in practical jokes, like launching an actor from the heavens too early and sending them flying into a tree. That's one theory for why Medea sometimes enters the stage with twigs in her hair. Historians still argue whether the chorus was meant to reflect public sentiment or act as a moral compass, or whether they were just background noise to fill space between monologues. Some say their songs held encoded political messages. Others say they were just a vibe. You sit silently in the back row, the stone of the amphitheater still warm from the day's sun. Dionysus hums the chorus's melody under his breath, nodding approvingly when a line lands right. Then something unexpected happens. One actor breaks character. Mid-scene. A line about sorrow tumbles out too raw, too jagged, and she steps forward, breath hitching. The rest of the cast freezes. She starts, then stops, as if unsure whether she's herself or still the queen she's pretending to be. And no one corrects her. Not the director, not the other actors. The silence hangs like a velvet curtain, soft but heavy. Then she tries the line again, slower this time, and somehow it works. She folds herself back into the rhythm like slipping into a stream after stumbling on its banks. You glance at Dionysus, who just whispers, "That's why we do it." You wonder, not for the first time tonight, whether these ancient Greeks were really so different from us. They had heartbreak, stage fright, missed cues. They wept at the wrong times and probably made fart jokes in the wings. They carved meaning from myth because real life was too chaotic to decode on its own. As you sit in the dark, the theater becomes a kind of dream, half murmured, half shouted, all lit by flickering oil lamps and held together by pure, stubborn will. A whisper near your ear. Want to see what they won't rehearse? You jump a little Dionysus again now, dangling a laurel crown he must have swiped off someone's costume bench. He leads you through the back corridor of the scheme where props lean against cracked columns, wooden swords, oversized lyres, papier-mâché chariots, and one unconvincing fake cow. A scrawled note on it reads, "Do not use still smells like cheese." You're not sure what that means. You don't want to know. Backstage, he pulls aside a curtain to reveal a different scene. The playwright, not strutting, not reciting, just curled in a ball mouthing lines in rhythm to his own heartbeat. He rewrites this one every night, Dionysus says. Still trying to get the ending right? You stare at the man, the creator, desperate for the illusion to land for the audience to gasp, laugh, weep exactly where he needs them to. It's a hunger older than temples, the yearning to be heard. He'll change one word, Dionysus says, and think that'll fix everything. You nod, because maybe that's what theater really is. Not a performance, but a dare. A dare to believe that telling the story just right can fix what went wrong in real life. You whisper thanks to the actors, the playwright, even the guy who made the cheese cow, and then follow Dionysus out into the night again. You follow Dionysus down a spiral path carved into the hillside lit by flickering torches wedged into stone brackets. The torches sputter occasionally, almost as if they too have a flair for the dramatic. Below you, the Athenian cityscape stretches like a quilt stitched in starlight. Faint lyre music drifts from a distant rooftop. You pause for breath and Dionysus turns with a smirk. Tired already? You mortals need better stamina. He's not winded, of course. Gods are unfair like that. You arrive at what looks like a crumbling wine cellar or a shrine. It's unclear which. The room is cool walls lined with cracked amphorae, some still leaking the scent of fermented grapes. This, Dionysus declares, is where the after-parties of the festivals used to happen. The real ones. Not the formal toasts and choreographed togas. The wild, sweaty, olives in hair chaos of it all. Mainstream historical fact. The Dionysia festival wasn't just about theater. It was a civic, religious, and social explosion that lasted days. There were processions, sacrifices, parades of phalluses. Yes, you heard that right. Competitive plays and lots of wine. Citizens, medics, and even slaves were encouraged to attend. It was considered a civic duty to enjoy yourself. Fringe tidbit. A few carved inscriptions found near old drinking basins suggest that some partygoers believed that spilling wine on purpose was a tribute to the gods of inspiration. Historians are divided on whether this was a religious gesture or just a fancy excuse for being bad at holding your cup. Historians still argue whether the festival's drinking contests had symbolic meaning, testing moderation and excess, or whether they were just drinking contests. The line between ritual and revelry was often blurrier than Dionysus's eyesight after his seventh goblet. In the center of the room sits a cracked marble bench shaped like a reclining satyr. Dionysus pats it fondly. He always hated being sat on, but he got used to it. You sit. He pours wine from a jug that appears from nowhere. Here's the thing he says. Most gods want temples. I wanted a stage. You sip. It's strong, smoky, possibly illegal. People think I'm about chaos, he continues. But theater's not chaos. Not really. It's structure pretending to be chaos. It's a script that feels spontaneous, like this wine. You think it's wild, but it was aged with care. You swirl the cup. He's right. It tastes like raspberries and thunder. Mortals think life is messy and stories are clean, he says. But really, it's the other way around. Life tries to follow a script, and stories, they just unravel where you least expect it. You watch the candlelight flicker on the walls, casting distorted shadows, one of a satyr prancing another, of a playwright pulling his hair. He leans close. Want to hear the part they never put in the myths? You nod, obviously. He smirks. I invented theater not because I loved stories, but because I was hungover. You blink. Too many nights like this, he says, gesturing to the wine, the laughter, the echoes of forgotten flutes. And one morning I woke up head pounding like Hephaestus dropped a forge on it, and I thought, ugh, I need something quieter than this. So he built a theater, not for noise, but for controlled catharsis, a place to feel big feelings in small doses, a stage to offload heartbreak in 5 acts. An arena to laugh at yourself before the gods laughed at you. Every mask is just a hangover remedy, he says. Every monologue is a confession made prettier. You want to laugh, but instead you sip again. And strangely, it makes perfect sense. You lie back against the satyr bench and let the story of the city fade into your bones. Somewhere above, an actor forgets a line. Somewhere below, a child asks their father who Dionysus really was. And somewhere in between, in this shrine of fermented secrets, the god of theater raises his cup to toast the pain that became performance. You awaken slightly. Though awaken may be a strong word for what's really just a dreamy shift in your slouch as Dionysus rustles through a pile of masks, stacked haphazardly in a side alcove. They clatter like seashells, each painted with a wildly exaggerated face. Open mouths frozen in horror, eyes bulging in ecstasy, brows furrowed like thunderclouds. These are the leftovers, he mutters. The masks that didn't quite make the final act. You shuffle over, fingers brushing the rough plaster of one. A tragic face, its tear trails carved in delicate rivulets. You blink, was that a wink? Maybe not, maybe yes. That's how it is in this place. Everything half pretends to be asleep. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Greek theater, actors wore masks not just for expression, but for acoustics. The oversized mouths helped project their voices through enormous amphitheaters. It was practical artistry, like a megaphone dipped in paint. Fringe tidbit. Some fringe scholars claim that certain masks were cursed, especially the ones used in tragedies performed during wartime. Supposedly, actors who wore them repeatedly suffered odd misfortunes. One broke a leg every spring. Another was bitten by the same goat 3 years in a row. One performer reportedly began sleep screaming entire dialogues. Historians still argue whether the sacred aspect of Dionysian theater had long-term religious power or if it was mostly symbolic pageantry. Some believe the plays were a kind of exorcism, letting out the grief, envy, or ecstasy that might otherwise rot society from the inside. Others just think people liked a good monologue. You settle back onto the cold stone floor surrounded by grinning masks and discarded scripts. Dionysus begins to perform not loudly, not even dramatically. He simply recites voice like slow thunder through wine fog. I knew a king who lost his mind before his crown. I knew a lover who found his heart too late. And I knew a fool who never spoke but died with applause in his ears. You're not sure if it's from Euripides or just something he made up on the spot. It doesn't matter. The cadence rocks you gently like a tide sliding over crushed grapes. The room darkens further as he dims the torches with a wave. You swear you hear clapping, distant, delicate like wind applauding through olive trees. Or maybe it's just your heartbeat slowing to the rhythm of the room. You glance toward the doorway where night seeps in, thick as stage curtains. For a moment, Dionysus looks older, tired even. The weight of 1,000 after-parties in his eyes. You know, he says, masks don't hide you. They reveal the parts you were too polite to show. You nod, but your thoughts are sinking like pebbles through honeyed wine. All around, the masks stare. Some leer, some grieve, some laugh in utter silence. You're starting to understand why hangovers needed theaters. It wasn't the noise. It was the shape the noise took. A place to cage chaos, choreograph the ache, and maybe just maybe step outside your body for a while. The god looks at you one last time and smiles, not mischievous, not divine, just a little sad. Good theater, he says, makes mortals feel like gods. But great theater, you wait. Great theater makes gods feel like mortals. He turns away, vanishing into the dark like a dream that wakes up before you do. You stir again, not entirely sure if you're drifting deeper into the play or waking from it. The torchlight has dimmed into a low ember glow, shadows thrown onto the walls now, dancing like lazy actors after the curtain call. Your breath slows to match their sway. Somewhere a lyre strums a note and immediately regrets it, returning to silence. You follow a quiet hallway that curves behind the stage, worn stones beneath your feet, etched with centuries of heel marks. This, Dionysus once whispered, was the hallway for the divine misfits, the backstage of belief where forgotten gods go to sip wine and debate critics. You find a chamber filled with amphorae, sealed jars with fading labels like Mirth, Fury, Doubt, the god of theater. It seems never fully trusted the actors to bring their own emotions. Better to bottle them vintage style. Mainstream historical fact. Greek theaters weren't just for plays. They were civic spaces, election sites, public meetings, even impromptu trials. Drama and democracy intertwined like ivy and marble. In some cities, attendance was mandatory. Skipping a play could earn you a fine. Quirky detail. Well, some of the earliest critic reviews weren't written, they were shouted. Boos, hisses, and even thrown fruit were common, though one record claims a playwright won the crowd back by stopping mid-performance and announcing free figs for everyone. It worked. Historians still argue whether Dionysus himself was truly worshipped during these performances, or merely humored if the rituals were earnest devotion or elaborate excuses to party in his name. The truth likely sipped from both goblets. As you wander, you spot a curious contraption. It's like a giant pulley hanging from the ceiling with a wooden arm and a sling. Dionysus calls it the mechane used to hoist actors playing gods into the air, descending dramatically into scenes where mortals had made an absolute mess. Deus ex machina. He explains, though his voice is only in your mind now, you break the plot. No worries, just drop a god in at the last second and fix it all. You grin. It does sound convenient. Too bad real life doesn't come with a trap door and a divine crane operator. You sit on a cracked stone bench once used by stagehands. Dust rises. Your shoulders relax. Nearby, a wall bears a chipped inscription. To lie well is to live twice. Maybe it was a playwright's motto. Or maybe just a bored actor waiting for curtain call. Somewhere down the corridor you hear laughter echoing, light-layered and genderless. It isn't cruel or joyous, just amused. Eternal backstage banter. You imagine it belongs to playwrights who died before their best work was staged, or to audience members who never fully returned from what they saw on stage. One mask sits in the corner untouched. Blank. No mouth, no eyes. You reach for it, but it's heavier than expected. Not in weight, just in silence. You don't put it on. Instead, you lean back, feeling the low murmur of centuries beneath you. Cracked walls whisper in ancient attic conversations, never meant for gods or critics. Just soft murmurs from playwrights, wondering if they should cut scene 3. From actors asking, did I overdo the death scene? From someone sweeping the stage who once dreamt of being Dionysus. You exhale slowly. Even the god of chaos had a crew. And a script. And probably a wine-soaked rehearsal where everything went terribly wrong. Outside, dawn is still far off, but inside the stage dims for the final scene. You wait quietly for the last act. The walls begin to shift again, not with motion, but with memory. As if the very stones are sighing, remembering one last performance before they let you go. You pass an alcove where masks are hung like sleeping faces. Tragedy, comedy, farce. One's got a crack through the eye, another. A nose bitten off maybe by a drunken satyr or an overzealous critic. The air here smells faintly of time, old paint and something else. hangover sweat. And there he is, Dionysus, draped in ivy and regret, lounging sideways on a bench of grapevines that have no business growing indoors. A goblet dangles from his fingers half full, sloshing with something the color of late apology. He squints at you through sleep-crusted eyes, nods like he expected you all along. You made it, he slurs. To the real show. You nod back. Words feel unnecessary, or maybe outlawed in this final act. Mainstream historical fact. The theater of Dionysus in Athens could seat up to 17,000 people. That's almost an entire modern football stadium packed not for touchdowns, but for actors in heavy robes yelling about betrayal and fate. Imagine the acoustics and the number of wineskins floating around the back row. Quirky tidbit. The actors wore platform shoes called kothornoi, which often led to clumsy, accidental pratfalls during serious monologues. Some audience members came just to watch people fall in style. Historians still argue whether theater in ancient Greece was meant more for moral instruction, social commentary, or communal catharsis, or whether at the end of the day, it was just the best excuse to take 3 days off work and yell at a chorus. You sit beside the god. He offers the goblet and you take a polite sip. It tastes like all the grapes that never got their moment in the sun. Above you, painted constellations start to blink. Stars flicker like footlights dimming before curtain call. Dionysus leans in. The secret is, he whispers, none of it was real, but all of it mattered. You're not sure if he means life or theater, or if there's a difference. He slumps backward asleep again. Ivy twines around his fingers like sleepy snakes. You rise quietly and begin walking. The corridor narrows, grows darker. Your steps feel lighter now, as if the platform shoes pass their awkwardness to you. A breeze brushes your ear. It smells of olives, old parchment, spilled wine, and applause. You turn the corner and find the stage again. Empty. No chorus, no masks, no Dionysus. Just soft dust and forgotten footprints. You step onto the boards. The stone floor welcomes you like an understudy who's waited centuries. A low hum begins. Not music exactly, more like the memory of music. It wraps around you like a curtain, and just before you fade from the scene, you hear one last line scribbled in the margin of an old script. All gods envy mortals. We get to leave the stage. The lights dim. The applause, if it ever existed, is gone. The curtain falls. And now you exhale. Let the marble fade from beneath your feet. Let the stage crumble gently into mist, its edges softening into the darkness that welcomes you without demand or judgment. You feel the silence grow long and low like the final breath between curtain and sleep. There are no lines left to deliver. No cues, no monologues, no forgotten props to fumble. Only the stillness of having played your part, even if only for yourself. The echoes of the gods soften to whispers. Dionysus snores behind the curtain, his goblet tipped over soaking the ivy. Somewhere far off, a chorus hums the kind of song that doesn't need words. It's the sound of tired joy, of endings accepted. You lie back on the cool floor of your mind's quiet amphitheater. No spotlight. Just starlight blinking slowly overhead like a sky full of fireflies with nowhere to go. The masks are gone. The audience has vanished. Even time for once forgets to keep marching. Here in this final hush, nothing is expected of you. Not even dreams. Only sleep. Deep, kind, curtain-drawn sleep.